If you've watched any of my previous videos on this channel, then you've probably heard me talk about how much I love the hate to love trope, the enemies to lovers trope. And for the longest time, I was thinking to myself, because I love this trope so much, I should read the OG Enemies to Lovers book, which is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and I did. Hey, it's Mia, and yesterday I finished Pride and Prejudice, and I have thoughts. So for the first part of this video, I'm going to give a quick review of this book, and for the second part of this video, I'm going to give 10 tips that I gathered from this book that Jane Austen uses in writing a hate-to-love romance. So I still don't really know what to rate Pride and Prejudice because the thing is, I have complicated feelings. I mean, they're mostly positive, but when I went into this book, I had simultaneously high and low expectations. The high expectations were everyone gushes about this book and loves it so much, and it's a classic and it's really popular. My low expectations were, I mean, it's a classic though. And this is gonna sound kind of lowbrow, but I mean, like, I like classics, but at the same time, I'm a pretty lazy reader. And so usually if I had a choice between reading a book published in 1813 or, you know, a trashy romance where I don't have to think that much, then I usually choose, like, I would choose the trashy romance. But the thing is, this book was like eating a vegetable salad that's healthy for you but still kind of delicious. The thing is, like, I ditched every other book I was reading at the moment for this one because I was like, I have to read it. So it exceeded my expectations, but at the same time I had this high expectations anyway. So I did give it 4 stars on Goodreads. I mean, there's reason to bump it up because if you look at the other books that I give 5 stars on Goodreads, it's like, it's on equal footing, so I'm not really sure how to rate this. What I do want to do though is reread this book. I don't know when, because I don't know when it would be annoying for me to read the same story over again. But yeah, I do want to reread it again at some point, and maybe when I do that, I'll bump up the rating. But yeah, I really liked it. Like, it's surprising how much I liked it. It's a good book, and if you've been meaning to read it, then you should. And if you like hate to love, read it. Even if you think that you don't really like classics, then I suggest you read it anyway. It's not too dense to get through. I mean, obviously you have to work a bit harder because the language is different, but it was good. And I think the characters are very likable. Even the annoying ones I think are likable. Like, I love Mrs. Bennet. I think she's so funny. And also this book actually made me laugh a lot. And I always say on my channel that it's really hard for a book to get me to laugh out loud. But I think as I've been reading so many funny books this year, it's actually quite common for books to make me laugh out loud. And this book is one of them. It made me laugh. And it's just really delightful. Yeah, so basically you should read this book. Okay, so now that I've talked about my thoughts on Pride and Prejudice, I'm going to talk about 10 writing tips for writing hate-to-love romance. Now these are just tips, not commandments, so you can cherry pick some of these tips and techniques and sprinkle them into your own writing, and some of them apply to hate to love specifically, some of them just apply to romance in general. So let's get started. So the first tip is to not dwell on physical appearance. Now, I mentioned this in my writing romantic comedies video, but it really grinds my gears every time I read a book and a character goes, oh my god, I hate my love interest, but he's so attractive, or she's so attractive, but I hate him or her. Maybe this is just a personal pet peeve and other readers don't really care that much, but to me, I feel like it's just so obvious. Like, I wish that things were shown rather than told. Anyway, in Pride and Prejudice, basically, even though Darcy is first described to be like really handsome and tall and whatever, famously he says that Lizzie is not handsome enough to tempt him. However, later when he does develop feelings for her, he does mention her beautiful eyes. As for Lizzie, I don't think she ever really dwells on Darcy's appearance. I feel like going through this book is like being in English class when you have to try and find the exact quote to prove your point. But I think Lizzie only really acknowledges how handsome Darcy is later. Okay, I'm not doing a very good job of selling this point. However, if you take the movie for example, I know specifically they have that scene where Lizzie admits how handsome Mr. Darcy is when she's looking at his sculpture. In the book, they don't have that. However, I think that Lizzie just stares at his portrait for a while. So that's true love, kids. The next point is really obvious, so I'm gonna get it out of the way, but the two characters have to hate each other for a reason. And I know that sounds really obvious, but you would not believe the amount of times I've read a hate to love book where there's not really a reason for why they don't like each other. In this book, it kind of showed me that I think that if there's a reason they hate each other, it's better if they're different, I feel like. I mean, maybe not necessarily better, but it does make for a different experience. For example, I never really understood the title of this book until I was interested in reading it. Mr. Darcy is proud and Lizzie is prejudiced, and that's like the two reasons why they clash. So I think it's interesting if you have two different reasons for why the characters don't like each other, like what they specifically don't like about each other. Another interesting idea is to have one character realize that they are in love with the other before the other character. Now, after reading this, I kind of realized that this is quite common in hate to love romances. I feel like there's not really any instances where both characters realize they love each other at the exact same time. So in Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy realizes that he loves Lizzie before she even knows what's going on while she still hates him, and that culminates in the really fun proposal scene. Okay, this is another really obvious one, but for each of the characters, their flaws should be challenged by the other, and by doing so, not only does it lead to character development, which is good, but it also shows that the two characters complement each other. So for example, Lizzie is prejudiced, and Mr. Darcy demonstrates that her judgments of people are flawed, and then she grows from that. Tip number 5 is to show that the characters are liked by other people, but perhaps not their love interest. So I think it's not a great idea to have a character that's hated by absolutely everyone. I mean, you can do that. Do whatever you want. I think that it's a good idea to show that other people like that character, because if other people like that character, then it shows that that character isn't absolutely awful like the main character might think they are, if that makes sense. That was a really bad explanation, but basically Lizzie thinks that Mr. Darcy is awful, but throughout the novel, people demonstrate how much they respect and like Mr. Darcy. One example of this is the servant at Pemberley. Does she have a name? Oh yeah, Mrs. Reynolds. So tip number 6 is to show that the characters are desirable. Now this is really similar to the previous tip, but basically this one focuses on demonstrating that other characters find the main couple, they have romantic interests in the main couple. For example, Mr. Collins and Mr. Wickham are interested in Lizzie, so it shows that, you know, like if those two guys like her, then probably other people like her as well, like she's attractive. And that's the same for Mr. Darcy. I mean, maybe Miss Bingley only likes Mr. Darcy because he's really rich and stuff, but there's probably other reasons. So by showing that other characters have interest in the main couple, it just further demonstrates that, you know, they are desirable and attractive and I guess suitable for a relationship. So yeah. So the next tip is for other people to see the attraction. For example, Miss Bingley is jealous of Lizzie, and she's the one that sees that Darcy is interested in Lizzie before Lizzie does herself. So I think by demonstrating that other characters see the attraction, it's a good way of showing rather than telling. Okay, so tip number 8 is for the main couple to be oblivious of each other's attraction. So one of my favorite parts is when Lizzie is staying with the Collinses. There's a lot of little instances, but like one of them is when Mr. Darcy just randomly shows up at the house and stays there for a bit. And then there's also another instance where she goes on a walk, but she runs into Mr. Darcy. And the next time she goes on a walk, she's like, I'm gonna go to the same spot because now that he's seen me there, he's not gonna go there again because he doesn't want to run into me. But then he's still there. So I think it's those small instances where the character thinks that the other character hates them when they actually don't. Like, they're not only funny, but I think that, well, I think they're funny, yeah. And by having the obliviousness, it really just adds to the tension and I guess to the reader's frustration, because you kind of just want to get into the book and just shake them and be like, can't you see that Mr. Darcy's in love with you? So tip number 9 is to have the characters work with each other or help each other in some way. This is really important because it overcomes the whole hate thing. So in Pride and Prejudice, the main thing that Mr. Darcy does to help Lizzie is by helping her family, and basically he deals with the whole mess that Lydia and Mr. Wickham created. And this is really nice in a lot of ways. He's being generous, but he's also interacting with Mr. Wickham, who is his enemy. So it just demonstrates how much he cares for Lizzie. So by getting characters to either work with each other or help each other, it really redeems them from whatever negative ideas the character or the audience might have about them. Which is a problem I have with actually a lot of hate to love books, where in my eyes, sometimes the character is never redeemed, and so I'm like, why do you love him? I'm still gonna hate him. Like, I think you should still hate him too. Lastly, we have the explanation scene. It's kind of like in mysteries where you have the detective get everyone in the room and then say, the person who committed the murder was you. Well, in this case, it's basically where the two characters have a conversation. Usually they're talking about like how the romance came about, if that makes sense. So in this case, Mr. Darcy and Lizzie talk about how they knew that they were in love with each other, like the whole process, and it's just basically like solving a mystery, and I think it's really satisfying to read. Especially if there's like little instances within the book that are like mini mysteries, like you're like, why did the love interest do that? But then it's explained that they did it because it had something to do with their love for the character. Okay, I've been talking about this book for a while, but hopefully you found this video at least somewhat helpful. I had a lot of fun making it. Tell me in the comments down below whether you've read Pride and Prejudice, whether you mean to, whether you liked it, any other tips about writing romances that you've got from the book. And yeah, if you want to see more videos from me about reading or writing, then consider subscribing. And that's it for this video. Bye!